working in conservation today, we're really standing on the shoulders of the giants that came before us. Conservation Florida is a statewide land conservancy, and we're focused on the protection of Florida's natural and agricultural landscapes, with a primary focus on connecting and permanently conserving the Florida Wildlife Corridor.
We protect wild places and we protect agricultural landscapes. We save that land from future development forever.
While we are very lucky to have some of our really special places already conserved, right now in this moment in time we have so much more to do.
In my opinion, the scariest thing facing us right now is out here, the artery of the Florida Wildlife Corridor. Those are some of the last large tracts, and they are being targeted right now by developers.
So we are running out of time to save our special places.
I mean, that project unfortunately will be houses.
I think the growth here is insurmountable. I don't see a way for us to connect. Where do we go from there?
We believe that Florida is the best place to live and work and raise a family. Right? Every single day we have 1,000 people moving to Florida, and we want to live here. And so we understand that other people want to be here too.
This is one of our new projects where we're working with a developer, and we're going to protect the most sensitive portion of the property.
A part of the long-term conservation solution will be working with developers to ensure that we're building where we should build and saving what we should save. We're also really big believers in conserving agricultural landscapes as a part of the solution for a green Florida. And that keeps ranchers ranching and keeps farmers farming, which ultimately adds to the health of our economy.
We as Floridians, we have this beautiful gift, but it's also a responsibility.
Providing a connected and protected corridor is really the long-term solution for a sustainable Florida. We know that what we save and what we pave over the next 10 years will determine the future of Florida, period. Thank you so very much. Before I get started, I will just say I had no idea how very intense my face got while talking about land conservation in Florida until this three-minute video was produced, and so I'm sorry about that. But also, this is a conversation that I think just absolutely takes a ton of passion and I think a little bit of crazy eye from time to time. So thank you for enduring that. Again, my name is Traci Deen. I'm the CEO of Conservation Florida, and our organization has been a champion and committed to corridor conservation since its inception. And we are thrilled to be with you today. I can say that my heart is very, very, very happy to be in this room with all of you. It's just been far too long since all of us got together to talk about our collective goals. And we have no small task before us. The protection of a connected statewide corridor. It's a wild idea. It's bold, but it's something that we should all be proud to be working on together. Now, our conservation community has achieved extraordinary results in the past, and I meant it with every fiber of my being during that video that those of us working in conservation today are standing on the shoulders of the giants that came before us. We're really lucky to have some pretty incredible conservation lands. But the challenges that we face today are different. When my grandfather was growing up here, there were 2 million Floridians. Today, 22. And that's in one lifetime. So, to protect a functional corridor, we must think beyond traditional conservation methods and implement strategies that are corridor compatible. The reality is that successful conservation at scale, and we're talking a statewide, millions of acres left to save scale. Will take collaboration, new tools, and innovative financial mechanisms. Some efforts are definitely underway, but we will need to look across sectors to increase our chances of success. Now, I know that this isn't easy to reconcile as conservation practitioners. I know it's not. And I know that when you hear TNC and Conservation Florida, and so many of us are looking to collaborate with developers, that it's not an easy pill to swallow. But it's one that we know and that you will hear on this panel will be necessary. We know that growth is inevitable. So the question for all of us in the room will be, what do we do about that? Now, protecting a functional corridor statewide, it is doable. It is doable. And it will be the people sitting in this room today that make it happen. So all of us today, we have to acknowledge that it will take all of us doing our part, and that it will go beyond our traditional conservation tools and strategies. This panel is designed to bring you food for thought. You may not agree with everything that you hear, and you are likely to have more questions. But the people I have the honor to introduce are renowned in their fields and are going to discuss economic tools, technology, growth, and collaboration. So first, I introduce to you Ron Ritter. Ron is a partner at Mckinsey & Company, based in Miami. He advises and serves clients in aerospace and defense, transportation, industrial and public sectors. His areas of expertise include operations strategy, lean manufacturing, maintenance, reliability, and organizational performance. He also served in the United States Air Force, improving operations performance as a senior executive. He's also the founder of Pangea Explorations, an organization providing operational, scientific, and financial support to critical marine conservation. This is a 72-foot sailing vessel that is with a core focus on marine conservation, education, and exploration of projects. Now, Ron graduated from the University of Miami, and I told him that we won't hold that against him. He has a PhD in zoology from Oxford University, based on wildlife conservation in Botswana, and he translated this for me, meaning he learned a lot about fixing Land Rovers and malaria. He regularly gets dragged around by his children and his wife outdoors, and he's an advocate for saving land. Now, Tony Cho is the president and founder and CEO of Future of Cities, a multi-sided platform focused on pioneering and popularizing regenerative development practices. Part real estate investment and development company, part think tank, part venture capital ecosystem, which leverages environmental social governance strategies, public-private partnerships, and opportunity zones. The Future of Cities aims to positively impact the lives of 1 billion people through innovations in the built environment. He's also the founder of Magic City Innovation District Little Haiti, founder and chairman of Metro One Commercial, and co-founder of Chosen Retreats. He's also based in Miami. Thank you for being with us. Now, Steve Brumby is the CEO, CTO, and co-founder of Impact Observatory. Impact Observatory is a mission-driven technology company bringing artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms and data to sustainability and environmental risk analysis for governments, nonprofit organizations, companies, and markets. Impact Observatory empowers decision makers with AI technology, tools that they need to succeed, including algorithms, data, and software. Steve is also a National Geographic Society Senior Advisor and a World Resources Institute Senior Fellow. He was the co-founder and CTO of Descartes Labs, a venture-backed startup focusing on understanding agricultural, natural resources, and human geography using deep learning technology and satellite imagery. Now, he received his PhD in theoretical particle physics at the University of Melbourne in 1997 and has over 100 science papers and journal articles. And we have Eric Eikenberg, CEO of the Everglades Foundation. Eric is a seasoned political strategist and environmental policy expert who leads the Everglades Foundation as its CEO. He oversees a team of nationally recognized scientists, educators, lobbyists, and communications and development professionals working to achieve a decades-long campaign to restore America's Everglades. And he previously served as chief of staff to former Governor Charlie Crist and a former US Rep. Clay Shaw. Now, the latter authored the landmark $8.4 billion comprehensive Everglades restoration plan. Eric has been a longtime champion for expediting Everglades restoration with a knack for innovation and engaging partners in the corporate, philanthropic, and political arenas. He was in the first 4-year graduating class of Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland and is a graduate of American University. He and his wife and 4 children reside in South Florida, in Palmetto Bay. So thank you so much to this incredible panel for being with us today. Now let's go ahead and get started. Now, Ron, there are 8.1 million acres of unprotected land in the opportunity areas within the Florida Wildlife Corridor. In that acreage lies more than conservation opportunity. We also know there's significant economic potential as well. What should the audience know from the economic study about the various economic drivers and levers needed to conserve a functional corridor?
Yeah, so nice, easy question. I'm super happy to be here. So by the way, it is a real privilege to be here, and we're grateful for that. I think we're all grateful to be in a state where we can have this conversation and have this in front of us. And I think this challenge is inspiring in the way that maybe if you were on the inside, I imagine going to the moon was inspiring, and it was like, that's really inspiring. I can't believe we have to do this. And as we look at it, and the question is loaded in that sense, if you think about it for a minute, this is almost an impossible problem to solve, right? I mean, if you actually value, and we've run this numbers, and we've all been running, everyone in this room is running some form of those numbers, it's somewhere 20, 30, 40, pick a number, $1 billion if you tried to just grab this land, right? So just grabbing a bunch of money, old school, and acquiring it, and taking it off the table through acquisition, it's not going to happen, right? That money is not coming, right? I'll just speak to, we're not going to get a $40 billion check. If someone has one, we should probably just take it.
Call me.
Right, call Traci. She'd like that. I don't know if I'm not sure we could handle that much at once, but we'd figure it out. But, I mean, I think the important thing is that these are working lands who are working economically today. They're working socially, culturally. They are also working biologically. So the task, as you start to break it down, is to look at protecting the lands as they are. Now that's the good news. We don't have to take them off the table, out of working status, out of private status, and put them into locked up public status. So there's an economy that's already there. It's valuable, functional, and it's economically valuable, it's culturally valuable, it's employment valuable. And you saw Mallory put some of those numbers up earlier. 100,000 plus jobs, that's probably undercounting it. $30 billion a year of annual economic value. And that is all over the place. That is things as unexpected as the economic value of DoD ranges and activities that require being next to open space, to odd things like phosphate mining, which is inherently dependent on not having it be developed land, to cattle ranching, timber, et cetera. So there's a large, valuable economy sitting on this land right now. So protecting the corridor is protecting an economy, right? And investing money to protect that economy. And if you also break it down, and this is probably the only way you maintain your sanity, at least we do, is there's 900,000 to 1 million acres in play in the next 10 years. That is the game for the next 10 years, right? There's 8 million acres overall, but there's 1 million that really matters right now. And that 1 million acres is 4, 5, 6 maybe, how do you want to play it, $1 billion of investment to capture that. That sounds like a lot, but that's in a reasonable range of when you think about anywhere between $100 and $400 million a year of annual investments that we've seen in Florida forever alone, which will not be sufficient, but it's at least like imaginable that we can solve that problem. And spending that money, investing that money in different forms, will maintain an economy of $6 or so billion, right? Around that first, what we call horizon land, horizon ones. Ultra valuable from a corridor point of view, and ultra urgent in terms of losing them. So there are favorable economics here, right? And now in a state with $1 trillion economy, these are all still relatively small numbers. But when you look at it at scale, there is a functioning economy. It creates jobs. It's valuable to us. We want to protect it. This does not need to be a charity exercise, okay? I mean, I'd start with that, and then maybe we kind of work on that.
Let's get back to that. Sure. So, Tony, this next question is for you, but we are definitely coming back to unpack that conversation. Now, we've been talking about the economy and the drivers that complement the corridor vision, and will absolutely play a necessary role in its long-term protection. Now, you are one of Miami's top real estate players, and you've been very successful in the development world, which is one that conservationists tend to be very wary of. You've also said, without proper planning and building, cities will lose land and natural biodiversity. We need to make drastic changes to how we build. If we continue the way we are now, we're going to destroy our ecosystems. How do we balance both when traditional development and traditional conservation are seemingly night and day?
It's a great question, and I think it's really the question of our time, not only for Florida, but for the country and the entire world. I mean, we need to align social and environmental strategies with business strategies and really evolve this capitalistic system to be one that works for 100% of life. And I think in cities, we forget that there are other species other than humans. And I think, you know, the wildlife corridor and wildlife corridors in general and getting into the wild make us realize that we're not the only ones out there. And I think that's, with the amount of biodiversity that we're losing, I think it's critical that humans get access to this. And so rewilding cities and biophilic design are critical to raising the awareness, because we have to be good storytellers. We have to be able to show people why it's important, why it matters. And if people are not around nature and around wildlife, it doesn't matter as much to them. And so my story is unique because I grew up in Indian River County in Sebastian, in an area that was largely undeveloped and, you know, had a lot of wildlife preserves and bird sanctuaries. And we have the St. Sebastian Wildlife Preserve right behind my property, which is 22,000 acres, where we have multiple endangered species, including sightings of the Florida panther and bald eagle and many, many species, because it's the Indian River Lagoon, which is very biodiverse. It's a brackish, you know, sweetwater system. Only last week did I find for the first time a dead manatee that washed up on our shore on the river, and that was the first time in 43 years that I had seen that. And so, as somebody who's developing within urban cores, I'm super cognizant around what our development and the impact that it's happening outside of cities. And Florida is very unique, although I'm a big advocate for smart, sensible densities within urban cores. In Miami, we're always fighting against that expansion of the boundaries into the Everglades, which I am a staunch advocate against, and really, you know, building up smart density within the urban core. But we need to recognize that Florida is a place for suburban development. And so we have to work with suburban developers, policymakers, and organizations like this to really educate people on the benefits of biodiversity and land conservation and why it's important not to pave over the whole state. So we have to educate and really give them incentives. I'm not going to get into affordable housing right now. That's also another major crisis that we're experiencing, but they're connected. You know, these issues are connected. And so I think when we do these types of campaigns and storytelling, it's very important that we get all of the players at the table to really solve and crack these big issues, because all the resources are there and all of the wealth and all of the people moving to Florida, they need to be educated on why it matters. There's a lot of people are moving from other places around the country, and all they know of Florida is Miami, South Beach, and Disney World. They'd have no comprehension of what happens in between those places and why it's important to protect the Florida Wildlife Corridor. So I think someone such as myself can really work and bridge the gap between somebody who's an environmental conservationist and a developer that believes in profit. But I believe in profit, people, planet, profit, and purpose working together and not bifurcating them. You can't separate those two anymore, and you can't just go about business as usual without taking into consideration environmental and social consequences.
Now, Tony, I will have to talk to you later about all of these tongue twisters that you continue to throw at us. People, profit, purpose. All,
Four
it's just,
Ps, the
yes,
four
the
Ps.
4 Ps.
Yeah.
But so I'll get with you on that later. But you mentioned.
Well, you were talking about it right before. It's not charity, it's impact investing.
Yes.
Yeah.
We need to figure out ways, the same thing with affordable housing, to incentivize. Why is a developer going to build affordable housing, when it's a very risky, industry to begin with, and there's market risk and there's all kinds of risks in doing development, when you can make much more selling luxury condos? It's an economic driver, and you have to look at what are the drivers that are creating solutions and really incentivize, and that's where you can create, cross-sector collaboration at scale, where you can incentivize people to do the right thing and give them benefits. And I think the same thing with suburban developers and people on large swaths of land, and really incentivize them in exchange for smart density and a smart plan, conservation easements, land conservation easements throughout the project, where they're donating a percentage, and that's how you get to your 8 million, acres. And those are the ways to do it, because you're not going to prevent development from happening. But you really need to educate, the people, and most of the people really do care. That's why we've got to end this, it's the developer's fault, it's the public sector's fault, it's politicians' fault, it's all of our faults, and we're not going to solve it. This is not a partisan issue. We were talking about this earlier. This is a human issue, and this is a multi-species issue, and this is a biodiversity issue. And we all benefit from biodiversity, from medicines to food to every aspect of our lives.
Tony, you mentioned, do you want to?
Yeah, let me just, this is super important and really interesting for us too. So, Betty made the point earlier about if we take traditional conservation action, one of the side consequences we may not have thought through is we take property off the tax rolls, or we diminish its tax value. So if we can protect the land or the corridor functionality of the land without doing that, it solves that other problem, right? So imagine a 20,000 acre ranch, and you obviously are the design expert on how to do this, but if we could set aside a portion of it for high value, ecologically sensitive development, let's say 5,000 out of 20,000, I'm making this example up, and protect 15,000. So maybe instead of as much golf courses, no offense to anyone who plays golf in the room, but it was more green corridor space, we might actually get both. We might get a very high value, socially valuable place to live and create it in a community, maintain the tax roll value, and get our corridor. And in fact, we've protected the whole 20,000, and we haven't used any public funds to do it. Theoretically, let's imagine a story like that.
And that makes a lot of sense. The problem is counties and municipalities are not talking to each other. There's not a statewide comprehensive plan for development. And without that, we're not going to be able to solve this problem. And that's how you can create incentives. You can tax certain things, and I agree with you. We don't want to take everything off the tax rolls, because that's incredibly important revenue for the state that then can be allocated towards things like conservation and ecologically valuable and socially valuable. I think the two are intertwined. And I think even in cities, from green roofs to biophilic design to vertical farming, so much more can happen that can rewild our cities, so the experience happens in the cities and people have more connection to nature. And I think that's really important. And we can leverage technology to help us get there through VR and through blockchain and through all kinds of new technologies that are moving towards these types of things. So I think that there are many different tools forward, and I think there's an education gap that needs to happen. There's so many new people moving here that want to understand what the issues are and want to be part of the solution.
Yes, and I think it would be a fascinating conversation to have, perhaps on one of our breakaways, about aligning business strategy with rewilding our cities. I'm fascinated by that, and I hope we can connect on that again. That's really great. Steve, now, science and technology will inevitably play a critical role in corridor protection. The science and data we use now is strong, but the corridor maps based on the Florida Ecological Greenways Network, priorities 1 through 3, are dynamic and ever-changing due to the very nature of the real estate world right now. Now, you've built an incredible product that brings AI-powered algorithms and on-demand data to sustainability and environmental work. How can we utilize technology to influence our corridor conservation work?
Thank you, Traci, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. So I have the clicker. Let's see if it works. And actually, I'm going to go to the next slide, and I'll back up to the previous one. So in the previous panel, there were several questions from the floor and in the discussion about, okay, we've got this wonderful map, and actually the plenary speeches this morning too. There's this wonderful map of the Florida Wildlife Corridor and the lands that are currently protected and the lands that have the opportunity to be protected. And as we just heard, you know, the first 10% of the land to be protected, it's a very important choice. And in a lot of ways, the success of protecting the rest of the land depends on success protecting that first group. If you give people a positive experience with that, you're more likely to get protection for the rest of it, or the right sort of investment for the rest of it. The issue is, though, and I think this is a really important point, most of the maps that are available to decision makers are not as dynamic or up to date as you might expect or hope. So Traci went through my sort of longish bio. I'll say that, so I'm originally from Australia, which is also a very large state with a tremendous amount of opportunity and also challenges, many of which are environmental in nature. I came to the United States 25 years ago to work on the space program. I was actually at the US Department of Energy for 15 years, developing Earth remote sensing and monitoring technology and automation of it for the US federal government. So I've built these kinds of systems that we're hearing people ask, where's the data? Where's all the big data that we need? Mo Pearson mentioned, where's the big data? I've built those systems for US government, for the Department of Defense. And then a number of years ago, 6 years ago, I actually went into the private sector and started a company, a venture-backed company that in its first year, we beat the USDA to forecast the US corn yield using free satellite imagery that was provided by NASA. So I've had the advantage of having built these types of systems for real, for the United States government and also for Wall Street. And then after doing that, I was recruited by National Geographic Society. And I was the senior director for geographic visualization at the Society for a few years, which really gave me the opportunity to be in the right place at the right time, to democratize the technology that had previously only been available to US government, federal government, and to the richest companies in the world, and start to show how it could be applied to conservation issues and issues at the intersection of conservation and sustainable development. So what we've built and what we're showing here is actually a picture of what we believe is the most up-to-date map of Florida, showing the locations of the cities and agriculture and low-intensity land uses that are critical for identifying areas that are opportunities for restoration. And the key thing is that the most up-to-date map of the United States is produced by the US Geological Survey, by a group of my friends and former colleagues at USGS. I serve on one of their advisory committees, so I know them all well. And the most up-to-date map is from 2019. And it's updated every couple of years, right? And we all know in this room that the pace of change, just from planned development, let alone changes due to storms and fires and things, is far faster than that. And you can't make decisions from data that's years out of date. Mm-hmm. So what we're showing here on this map is something that we released. The first version was released in June of last year, and then this new one is released in January of this year. There is now the capability, several teams have it, we're happy to say we're the first, to be able to produce maps at previously unobtainable spatial resolution and scale and speed. And so this solves two things. One, it gives people the dynamic data that they need to be able to make decisions, because it's one thing to draw a line on the map and say, this is protected, or this is going to be restored, and here's a check, go restore it. Who checks that they did it? Who checks that the work has happened the way you expected it to? Or that something else hasn't changed and really the money should have gone somewhere else? That type of data has historically only been available to the US federal government and to some of the richest companies in the world. And it is now possible to provide it in a much more easy to use, much more, quite frankly, much cheaper format that can enable decision making from country level to state level to local level. And so we've actually been selected, we're working with the UN to bring this technology to country governments all around the world. And there's a real opportunity to make this data available to everybody from president of a country down to concerned citizens who want to know what's going on. And I know I've been talking for too long, but I'll just wrap up by saying this is a moment of radical transparency. And a gentleman at the end of the last panel made a comment about, this radical transparency is coming in the next 10 years.
Yep.
It's actually here right now. And there's interesting implications from it.
So Betty on the last panel mentioned that she's driving down in Okeechobee County and she sees these for sale signs going up on these ranch lands. And I can say the Conservation Florida team experiences the same thing, and panic strikes us when we see those for sale signs, particularly when we know that they're a critical linkage in the corridor. And then within a year, 2, sometimes those ranches are gone.
Yeah, and actually the picture that we're now showing, which was the other slide, is that business actually knows where a lot of this change is happening. So actually this is an anonymized list. The green points that you see on this map are an anonymized set of points of places where there is currently a planned development. And so you can combine this with the maps of how the environment is changing to start to produce threat assessments, to use a DoD term, but to start to guess, to start to estimate which are the areas that you need to invest in first, because they might be the first domino that causes a serious change, okay? And the only way to do this is a partnership between private industry that has access to this type of data and this type of tech and can move quickly enough to get this data into the hands of decision makers now. Because we all know federal government, I've been there, I built these systems in the federal government. Federal government is very slow and deliberate. And we need solutions that fully harness the entrepreneurship of the commercial sector as well as the passion of the conservation sector.
Yeah, and I think something I just want to add to that is, the velocity that we've got to get on top of the analytics, but I'm just thinking again back to Betty's comment, which was so prescient about seeing the sign. I guess, how do we see the sign before the sign goes up? What is the analytical way that we can get ahead of that and predict? And one of the things that we did in the last 6-8 weeks running this, and we literally, Duco hates it when I say this, but we literally rented supercomputer time. That's the scale of data that you have to crunch through to get to this. But one of the analytics that you look at on a very granular basis across the state is where does the current market value of land start to depart substantially from the economic value of just using it as you are. So when that land value starts to significantly outpace what you can get by holding it and ranching or timbering or whatever, you've just flagged, you've put that for sale sign up digitally and analytically. The person may not have really made that decision yet, but it's probably coming, right? So, I mean, and you know what, when you run those numbers, that's partly where that Horizon 1 urgent land set comes from, is you can see them analytically before the sign even goes up.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the people in this room, and we have the boots on the ground in here.
I'm sorry, Horizon 1, not all of us know what that means.
So you'll see that phrase, but there's a first tier of land that is most urgently needed. So it's the first 1 million acres that, again, if we don't capture that, no amount of not at risk lands will make up for the fact that we lost that critical 1 million acres, call it 1 million, that's sitting right in the heart of the corridor. Because a corridor is a corridor, we can't just add more land and forget about the hole that we left in the middle. So it is that first tier of most urgent, most valuable. Priority 1 plus super high urgency gets us that Horizon 1.
Okay.
I'm sorry. So a lot of people in the room don't know that the prioritization of the land to get this corridor preserved has been done by Mckinsey, and we have that report available.
Yes. So just in case Arnie wasn't mic'd up, a lot of the data is out there because we've studied it, right? And we know. Can you talk to the audience about what went into prioritizing these lands? What was contemplated?
So a lot of the data, and we need to continue to enrich it, is here. There is Archibald and others have done the prioritization from a biological and a corridor perspective about what land is most important. And then the urgency has been an analytical exercise. It's the latest in a series of these. It's not all new. That said, when you look at the development trends, the trajectories, the economic differentials, et cetera, there is some of that land that is far more urgently at risk than others. So you put those two together, and you get today's latest cut of what is the most urgent, or sometimes we now call it Horizon 1 lands. And there's a Horizon 2 and 3, et cetera. So.
Well, it sounds like
Yeah.
Impact Observatory, yeah.
Right, and then
And you just
the
pick
the extra thing that people need to realize now is that there is the ability to, in a very affordable way, enable remote sensing down to almost real time. So imagine that you are really turning management of the state of Florida at every level into something that's more like a real experimental system that you can, if you make a policy action, if you make a purchase, if you make some change on the ground, you can get the feedback to control your decision making, to help improve it. And you can do this not in a time scale of years, which is unfortunately how many governments are sort of required to operate, even at the US federal government level. But now there's the opportunity to provide, because of data from NASA, because of data from the European Space Agency, there's the opportunity to provide this data down to near real time. And the technical capability now exists and is very affordable to process that data to the point where you can actually use it. We all have the experience of using Google Earth. Google Earth is tremendously compelling when you look at it. The problem with Google Earth is you are looking at a satellite image of the Earth, and you need to be an expert to know what to do with that, right? The pictures I was showing before are teaching the computer to turn it into something that's easy enough to use that you can put it straight into an Excel spreadsheet. You give me a county, here's how it's changing over time over the last few years, and therefore we can now start to forecast a trend. How is it changing ahead of time, before it happens, so that you can anticipate the areas where the traditional uses of the land are going to be most at threat.
Absolutely. Eric, you've built an impressive career knowing the environment of politics and the politics of the environment here in Florida. It's been said time and again that the environment is a bipartisan issue. In your experience coalescing broad support for a massive undertaking in restoring the Everglades system, what wisdoms can you share with us on tackling this big idea in an effective and unifying way?
Well, let me first say how heartening it is to be here this afternoon and to listen to the three of you all talk about some really cutting-edge thinking and really being thought leaders on this topic. I also want to thank Carlton Ward and Mallory Dimmitt for their leadership on this topic, this whole idea of raising the awareness. This is long overdue. This type of a gathering, these conversations are long overdue, but here we are. And I think we're at a juncture as a state. Certainly coming out of a pandemic, we've seen a population growth that's returned almost to the levels that we saw before 2008, 2009. So Florida is a popular place to come, and they're here for a variety of reasons, certainly to recreate, to fish, to boat. Our natural resources, the conservation realities of Florida. And I think to really understand the balance of how we do this, it's not one organization, it's not one train of thought, it's a collective effort, it's a collective thinking. And to see just the simple idea of mapping in real time to understand where these critical lands are so that when for sale signs do pop up, you can immediately move into a measure of protection or to conserve. And there's legislators in this room who represent Floridians in Tallahassee in particular. Certainly a former chairman of the Appropriations Committee who I would imagine would have loved to have this type of data as they're making difficult and important decisions at a statewide level. So I certainly compliment the effort that is being brought here this afternoon to talk. But let me just say, as it relates to what is the success, whether it's the business community, whether it's the conservation and environmental community, all of us have to come together to realize this can all be protected. We can survive and thrive as a state of 22 million people and the projections show continued growth over the next number of years. We can have industries that are important to the economy of Florida. We can have a vibrant real estate market. We can have an outdoor recreation economy that is second to none. And we could restore the largest wetland ecosystem in the world. And as far as these maps are concerned, and I have one here that I'll show. I hope this is the right button here.
Yes.
I mean, this kind of tells the story. You have a natural landscape right up against development. And this is from the county where when we moved to Florida, Broward County. This is, in my view, how you shouldn't do it. How we can, as Tony says, think more proactively, how we can do the development with conservation in a manner that's smart. And it can be a leadership from the state of Florida. But to do this as a coalition, to do this with multiple and numerous voices at the table, and to bring people along, I think this is the greatest challenge, and more importantly, the greatest opportunity Florida faces is to make sure a corridor is in place for generations to come. And I hope these maps, we can overlay all the Everglades restoration projects that we're seeking billions of dollars from Washington and from Tallahassee and from the 16 counties that make up the Water Management District, because the maps tell the story, and we can't miss any of those opportunities.
Excellent. I actually know some of the folks in this room are working on those exact reservoirs. So now, Ron, having led the team as it conducted the impactful economic study that we're hearing so much about and really digging into, please tell us how and why connecting and conserving a functional corridor will impact Florida's economic health.
I mean, the basics of this are Florida can't have an economy without a functioning environment. I mean, it's a pretty obvious statement. I think everybody in the room knows this. So if you look at it on the first surface, there's an economy on this land already. We need to protect and conserve that economy and make sure it stays there. But the rest of the $1 trillion economy that is on the state of Florida depends on a healthy, functioning corridor in its center. Like, I don't think any of us, I'm going to say something very un-McKinsey for a minute. It is wildly unacceptable that we have a big paved over stripe down the center of the state. Like, I can't even imagine that the economies on the margin are going to function in an attractive, high-value way if we destroy the center. Like, it just doesn't even, you can't even imagine that being a functional reality. So the two are obviously dependent. We've got a functioning rural lands, working lands economy in the center, and the attractiveness of the state, the viability of the state, environmentally, socially, culturally, every other dimension depends on that staying in place. Right? And I don't think there is a plan B of converting the center and hoping to keep the margin, you know, the current coastal economy, so to speak, functioning in a way. And I think our job is to be innovative and come up with ways to enrich the economy of the center so that it is economically sustainable and attractive and can go forward for all the families that are living and working out there today, right? And we just have to be up to that, right? Because the $40 billion check is not coming.
Can you give us some examples of what levers we might need to begin to utilize?
Well, I mean, I just want to pile on the really good insights down here too, is that the most innovative thing I think we need to do is to put the tools that we have and we're developing into the actual hands of the decision makers, which last time we checked, our families sitting around the dinner tables on their own land in the center of our state. So if I'm a family with a 20,000 acre ranch, I actually want that high-tech real-time map on my iPad. It'll probably be on my kid's iPad if it's my house. And I want to go in and explore it real-time and visually and understand where my land sits relative to the story. And I want to be able to make those economic assessments and understand the diverse set of economic choices that are in front of us as a family in making that decision so that we can make a more enlightened decision, maybe, and one that makes us feel better about how to retain our land in a viable economic status, which is going to have to be how this works, right? We cannot depend, in my opinion, on the charity of all these working families out there to simply do the right thing on the behalf of the rest of us. We've got to give them an economic basis for doing that.
And that is the sense of urgency is now to make sure that those tools are available or that line of thinking is available, because the pressure points are happening as we see the population grow. And certainly it is an economy of the coast. I appreciate that line. It's a tourism-based economy. We certainly have our natural landscapes that need to be protected, but folks are coming and they're populating still along the coast. So to protect that spine from Orlando south down all the way to the Florida Keys, I think is vitally important as the 21st century of Florida, this economy continues to grow.
Yes. So coming for you again, Tony, I'm going to say something that I think most everybody in this room is going to, sustainable suburbia. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
It's not ideal, but it's what we have to live with. And I was just thinking as everybody was talking about, there's this climate migration discussion happening. The UN predicts that up to a billion people might be climate change refugees by 2050. And most of that is in Africa and Southeast Asia and other places, but Florida is certainly not immune. We are on the front lines of climate change. And how does that impact the corridor? Well, it impacts the corridor a lot. I mean, where I'm developing in Little Haiti, people consider that climate change gentrification because we're 18 feet above sea level. So people are looking at that as people moving off the coast. So I think that's another layer, another threat that we have to consider. And so there is going to be development, and there is development, and there are ways to do suburban development that de-emphasize the automobile, and you can create communities with density that have public transportation, that are thought out, that are walkable. And how do they become walkable? Well, you have these greenways and these blueways that are developed as part of your entitlements. And so I think that's really where you start with educating the landowners, the ranchers, and I do want to recognize Carlton Ward and Path of the Panther and the work that they've done all around the state, and that's the reason I'm here, and Tori and Eric, and the storytelling and dealing with the ranchers and telling them why it's so important and looking at the options. But there are people who can educate buyers and say, I'll sell you this land, but it's really important that you take X, Y, and Z into consideration. And there really needs to be incentives, the same incentives that need to be in place for affordable housing. So there are ways to develop suburbia that de-emphasize the automobile, that conserve land, that are building sustainably, that are building off-grid. Agri-hoods, for example, is a new trend that's emerging. And yes, it's mostly been prototyped in the ultra-luxury segment, but growing your own food and kind of incorporating those industries that are already active within the center part of the state and making these craft businesses thrive, I think could be something part of the new story of Florida. And so I think it's about being innovative, it's about being creative, and it's about aligning incentives with the landowners, the public sector, the private sector, the foundations, and working together towards these solutions. But there are models. I mean, there are people who are doing regenerative eco-villages and villages around the world that are completely self-sustaining, that are completely regenerative, that are producing all their own energy, that are harvesting rainwater, that are producing all their own food, and they have their own ecosystem that's self-sustaining. Why don't we take a page out of that book and help developers understand, how is this marketable? How is this going to attract new people? Well, I think certainly everybody in my generation and older and younger are interested in, we know we're entering a food crisis with what's happening in Ukraine and all over the world with inflation. We know we're entering a food crisis. How are we going to produce our own food that's healthy in the future? And Florida is an agricultural state, and we're losing that agriculture. So I think the time is now. I think there is a sense of urgency, and we're going to continue to see pressures of people moving here, but you're also going to see climate migration happening. I know Orlando is a recipient of that, and I know people who have moved here, first affordability and other because of scares of sea level rise and climate change. But in the work that I'm doing in Miami and with innovation districts, I think Florida should actually be the poster child of climate solutions and conservation solutions. Why should we not? We have all the capital, all the resources, and we have a lot of intellectual capital and a lot of technology now that's forthcoming where we can create and prototype a lot of these solutions, but you have to be willing to experiment. You've got to be willing to have these laboratories and willing to work with people to try new things, and nothing is going to be perfect, right? So you've got to prototype them.
And I think that's why we're really grateful for the work Future of Cities is doing. We are predicted that we're predicting right now that about a third of the state of Florida will be paved by 2070. So incorporating a lot of these ideas and really uplifting them will be critical as we move forward in building this place
And innovation in construction industry and technology is critical. We're looking at 3D printing of homes with hempcrete. There's carbon capturing concrete now. So but we invest less than 1% of the construction industry in R&D, and we need to increase that substantially because the built environment is estimated to double or triple in size over the next 30 years. Does anybody have an idea of how massive that is? I mean, all the square footage on Earth is estimated to double. And what will that mean? That means double the concrete, double the steel, double the energy consumption, and all the negative environmental impacts. So we have to disrupt the construction industry, and that's how we're paving things. And I think, de-emphasizing the automobiles, going vertical, smart density, leveraging technology, and smart comp plans that are, across county lines and across state lines that people are working together and incorporating best practices from around the world. There are people, Australia is super progressive in sustainable and regenerative development. A lot of European countries, and so I think we need to really incorporate the learnings and best practices from other places and be thought leaders in this regenerative development space because we have the resources, because we have the natural resources and the capital here in the state now, and we need to educate the newcomers because I think there's 1,500 people a day moving to Florida.
It keeps
I don't
going
think it's
up.
1,000.
The number keeps going up.
I think it might be more.
No, I'll tell you, I think disrupting the construction industry with innovation is going to be something that excites a lot of the people in the room, a lot of the conservationists for sure. So I think, I hope that all of you in here pull Tony aside and have a deeper conversation about that because there's really something there.
And it's a huge business opportunity. I mean, we are short 4 million homes in this country. We're short millions of affordable housing and hundreds of millions around the world, billions. And so this is this is not charity. This is the biggest economic opportunity of our generation. And people don't see it yet, and so hopefully some people do, not everybody, but is certainly an opportunity, a business case to be made for sustainable and regenerative development.
And conservation.
And conservation integrated into it, obviously.
Yes. Steve, rapid development combined with a lack of statewide strategic growth plan is cause of deep concern for the success of a connected and conserved corridor spanning the state. The corridor exists today. It's green and it's functional, but it's not protected in perpetuity. In your mind, what kinds of predictive or real-time modeling can empower decision makers, the decision makers in this room today, with the timely, actionable, science-based geospatial insights we need to succeed? And honestly, this is a time to brag about how your work has really guided many governments around the world.
Yeah, usually people don't encourage me to brag, but I'll just say that a couple of really key things here. So I know that there are representatives in the room that represent some of the state mapping and state engineering organizations, the departments and organizations that are serving decision makers at all levels of politics. And my hat, which is over my chair, is off to you all for the work that you're doing with pretty, technology that's good, that's developed a lot over the last 10 years, but has not had the opportunity to really take advantage of the wealth of data that's now available, okay? A lot of the changes that we're talking about have literally only happened in the last couple of years. And so to me, the opportunity is to get this new technology, this new data into the hands of everybody from the county engineer or the county, county planning committee up to the state government and then to federal level, and accelerate that process of adoption on a time scale of like months rather than years, because progress has traditionally been too slow, right? The data is all here now. There's many years of data that's literally like sitting in the shelf, on the shelf. And it's no longer just sitting on the shelf. Now it sits in the cloud, right? Everybody heard about the cloud. It's not just for YouTube and TikTok. It's actually useful, surprisingly. And it's the key thing about the cloud is that it's not just about storing data. It's also about having the right sort of compute, the right sort of literally computers that live in the cloud that can do stuff with the data before you get it. so that you don't have to be a PhD in geospatial data to know what to do with it, right? And so there are many specialists, mapping specialists, cartography specialists, planning specialists at every level of government across the country, across the whole world, that at the moment they're used to going to some really big, major foundational companies in the field. So for example, Esri is the world's leading mapping company, does all sorts of stuff supporting governments at every level all around the world, has given tremendous support to state governments everywhere. They were a major sponsor of the work that we've done. UN Development Program as well as UN Environment Program has sponsored the work that we're doing. We've started to work with some of the leading conservation groups that are looking at large landscapes and managing large landscapes for private landowners and top-end tourism operators who are adjacent to the spectacular national parks in Africa, right? These are valuable properties where master development plans for the entire landscape is essential to retaining the value. So Betty said many, many wonderful things in her talk, in her remarks earlier. The two that I would just want to echo, one is that we often hear, and it's one of the main things that we should listen to people when they say it, is that everything is connected. Everything, you can't really mess around with one pit without having unexpected outcomes somewhere else. And so being able for everybody to see a common set of facts across what's happening is really revolutionary, really gives us the sort of decision-making framework that I think everybody wants. And we can now provide that to people. And the other part of it is that, the other thing she said, which I think I really like, is that we have to be better at explaining the consequences of what we see, so that everybody can understand how it's going to impact them and their decisions. And that we can enable decision makers to offer new types of incentives, so that we're not just saying, here's your green tax, please come again. It should really be, here's an incentive. If you are going to set aside 5% of your property, let's make it super easy. Let's make it frictionless, in the words of, in tech speak. Let's make it very, very easy for somebody to make a decision about protecting, say, a riparian area along their riverbank in their large farm, and then be able to be incentivized to do that, and then have it very, very easy for them to report it, and for everybody in the system to be able to agree that they've done something and be rewarded for it. And that type of feedback that enables decision makers to have better levers to control behavior, and easier, frictionless systems to incentivize people and then pay those systems out so that people see benefit from them. That's the way in which I believe that technology can really help. Technology by itself, okay, it's wonderful, but it's not actually going to help anything. It's only when the decision makers adopt it and we figure out by talking to people, how do we really help people at the front line, that the technology is actually brought to bear and is useful.
Well, snaps to that, Steve. So listen, I need everybody, if you do have questions, to please don't forget to put them on the white cards. We are going to ask a couple more questions and then take some questions from the audience. So please go ahead and jot those down now if you have them. So, Eric, let's talk about partnerships. There are about 300 people in the room today, at least 200 of whom are conservation practitioners, just boots on the ground. You are no stranger to contemplating the protection of vast landscapes and tapping into the power of partnerships to tackle conservation efforts. You mentioned earlier, no one organization, agency, group, or industry will be able to protect the corridor alone. It's going to take all hands on deck. How can we leverage the combined capacity of the people in this room to do something monumental?
Well, I think it's all the voices that are in this room, folks that are taking time to be here and to listen to these topics. The passion I know exudes because there's a number of dear friends in this room. I think to have an understanding of what is the objective, what is the clear ask. I mean, we see the maps. Your video summed it up beautifully as folks are looking at the state of Florida and determining what patches or the horizons where you should immediately go towards. Yes, it comes down to money. But going there as a collective group, as a coalition of conservation advocates, to tell members of the Florida legislature in particular, the governor of Florida, this is the priority that we would like to see. And I'll just say this, and this may not be popular to those that are following this more than I am. But I have observed over the last number of years, when you go from Preservation 2000 to Florida Forever, and we're in now a third decade, if you will, of land buying and land preservation. And there's a list. There's a list of lands that are needed. And you go to Tallahassee, and as we advocate for Everglades restoration dollars so we can redirect the way water flows on the peninsula, and instead of wasting fresh water, send that water south down to Everglades National Park and the Bay. But you hear talk about a process that is not frictionless. And you have advocates that want to see this sense of urgency when dollars are appropriated, when you get numbers of $200, $300, $400 million to go to land buying or land conserving. You want the process to keep up with the sense of urgency. So I think there needs to be an understanding by groups or voices that are in this room of what is the objective, what is the clear ask. If there's dollars that have been appropriated, how can we push to see them come out quicker? Because again, as those for sale signs go up, you don't want to see sold. You don't want to see it sold to a developer who's going to come in and create another subdivision that's going to strain the resource. So I think the call to arms here that comes out of this conference, which I again say is long overdue, is what can we all do as we talk to legislators, as we talk to the governor, as we talk to the congressional delegation. The money's flowing. There is money out there that we can tap into. I understand 40 is a big number to go after. But the voters have stepped up. We've amended the Constitution to put money away from real estate transactions for conservation. We can do this. And we have to come out of this with a clear direction, and all of us together needs to make it happen.
All hands on deck. We're going to take some, thank you, Eric. We're going to take some questions from the audience. Thank you. Steve, are the tools you mentioned available to the people in this room? I knew this question was coming. How and at what cost?
Well, what cost? Okay. So no, I'll give a non-glib answer. So the tools that we're talking about here, they do exist now. If you would like to see the UN's version of what we've built, there's a site called unbiodiversitylab.org, and we can share it with the conference organizers to put it up, where you can already go and you can look at the sort of country dashboards that are being provided of near real-time data for all the world's countries. That's a sponsored program by UN Development Program and UN Environment Program, UNEP, that we built and is loaded with the data that we've built. And you can also get the data at the moment. So sample data of everything that we've done is provided currently. You can get it all. You can start to look at historical data. It's available through Esri's Living Atlas. So all the folks in the room that are already using Esri products, it's just another data set that's currently freely available through Esri Living Atlas. And it's also available through the new Microsoft Planetary Computer. So Microsoft has been a tremendous partner. Basically, they launched their planetary. So Lucas Chopra at Microsoft, who's the Chief Conservation Officer at Microsoft, who I'd met when I was at National Geographic Society, he pushed Microsoft to create this planetary computer that they released just about a year ago. And when it first launched, they actually trusted my team with the keys with this new supercomputer. And the maps that we've made have been done with that Microsoft. So anyway, so the Microsoft Planetary Computer is another way to get it at the moment. And the monitoring product that goes down to near real time, we launched it last month. And it's available through Esri's Marketplace, for example. And we believe that, and here's something that I believe is a common pattern in Silicon Valley companies, is that the cost of production of this data has plummeted. the cost of the satellite data, the cost of the compute, the cost of the storage, the cost of the distribution of the data is much less than it ever used to be. So why should governments and counties all expect that their prices are still what it was when it was boutique and you had to go to, in my lifetime, I've worked with folks who actually contributed to the moon landing and to looking, literally photo interpretation experts who looked at the film that was brought back from Cuba during the missile crisis, some of the people I worked with back in the day. Instead of having to go to the fridge to get the film that came from the plane that risked its life to get the data, you can now get this stuff so cheaply that cost and that reduction in friction should be passed on to the user.
Well,
What you should find is that we are currently inviting beta users to the monitoring system that we've built, and we would love to figure out ways to work with Florida to help use Florida as a test case, as an absolute world-leading test case of how this type of data can help improve, can not replace. We're not saying anybody's made the wrong decisions, but help it start to inform decision makers at every level, give them the best data. And by the way, your constituents are seeing the same data too. It's radically transparent. How can you give the right data so that you don't have the developers have better data than the people who are trying to protect the wilderness?
I have a feeling you're going to be a very popular guy after this panel. One last question, and then I'm going to ask each of you to leave our audience with a thought. So now, Ron, you mentioned earlier that development scenario combining high-value social impact and high-value biological impact is possible. Our question mentions that they see the economic incentive for the built space to be high value, but they see no incentive for the green space to be high value. How can we ensure that the green space is also high value and not just greenwashing?
Well, I think part of it, a more private sector answer, and the more public funding we can get, of course, is always a good thing, but is we've got to create alternative and competing economics that support the decision at the dinner table to make a better, more informed choice. So we talked about higher value, more sustainable residential development choices. Clearly that's one. But being able to access, for example, global carbon markets, as an individual landowner, being able to use that technology to tap into that, being able to tap into ideas like enhanced ecotourism and to me, it just, especially when I watch these videos about how beautiful this landscape is, and having cut my teeth, like many of us in Southern Africa, on high-end safari tourism, it's just remarkable to me that we don't have more glamping and ecotourism in Central Florida in the center lands. Would somebody please solve that?
I'm working on it.
Yeah, this is,
I'll be
this is
there.
a great
I have a Florida
entrepreneurial
safari.
opportunity. So whoever brings that entrepreneurial business model to the fore helps solve that problem, right? And so on. So they're all, and there's, what does a solar farm look like on this land that's compatible with wildlife and conservation, right? That's a problem to be solved. But the more we solve those, the more we create enhanced economics that actually stand a chance against, the old school, just, pave it over and develop it in a non-sustainable suburbia model, right?
All right, Eric, leave us with a thought.
As I get older, I like to work on things that unify people. And this is a unifying issue, and it needs to remain in that realm. As we work to save America's Everglades, it's all about water. And as we look for innovation and new thinking and thought leadership and a sense of urgency on this conservation task at hand, let's have this generation be the ones that do it, that we can accomplish it. And then we pass it on to our kids and our grandchildren, and they look back to the year 2022, and that was a pivotal moment where enough hand-wringing, enough groupthink, and instead we move quickly and we save Florida for generations to come.
Well, hallelujah. Love that. Steve, leave us with a thought.
So the key thing I want to leave people with is that for a number of years, people have been saying, we've seen the stories about space, and the space sector is growing. So if you go back to the original RAND organization's study of what is the real most important application for space back in the 50s for the Eisenhower administration. Their answer was Earth observation. And we've finally reached the point, just in the nick of time, where this data is now available to inform decision makers at every level. And Florida is so famous for its space industry. I think there is a tremendous opportunity to put a lot of this technology, to base this technology even here in Florida. And I just think this really is both the need and the long, strong history of technology in the state of Florida makes this a really interesting case study that can inspire this type of development across the Southeast and show a bipartisan approach to bringing technology to enable decision makers with a common set of facts. And if you can do that, then it can potentially help the whole country.
Yes, you rock. Steve, you rock.
Traci, can I leave us with a number? 1 million acres in 9 years, which is eerily similar to the time frame that Jack Kennedy gave to the Apollo program. Go there in 9 years. 1 million acres in 9 years means 10,000 acres a month. That's the pace that we need to be moving at. It doesn't mean we need to acquire 10,000. We need to cover 10,000 acres, which means that at a time we were all sitting here, we needed to have added another 1,000 acres. Okay, that's the pace. Just remember that. Whatever we're talking and doing, we need to be moving at that pace on average for the next 9 years.
You hear that, team? Okay. Tony.
And also, 9 years before that moon landing happened, they celebrated the moon landing as a manifestation tool to actually make it happen. So you have to really manifest those realities. But I'll leave you with one of my favorite quotes from Buckminster Fuller, who said, "Don't fight the existing system, create a new system that makes the old system obsolete." And I think we're at the precipice of a new, incredibly exciting, innovative time. We have a lot of resources here in this state, and we could be a demonstration state. We could really be a leader, not only in climate change solution and conservation solutions, but really in the future of humanity. And I think we have this dichotomy between these really dynamic, innovative urban centers, along with some of the most beautiful nature and wild Florida has to offer. And I think that this is a really unique opportunity to kind of bridge those two and create something that's synergistic and harmonious. And I think we have this opportunity.
Abso-freaking-lutely. I just want to say...
2 snaps to that.
Yeah. 2 snaps. Thank you to this incredible panel. Please join me in saying thank you. You guys are amazing.